Chapter 17. The Hotelings and the Conklings, all but aboriginal in the Hudson Valley, have been described somewhere or other as vast tribes. Isaac N. Hoteling was somewhat vast himself. He was 6 feet tall to the inch, and he weighed somewhere over 200 pounds. He had seen and smelled powder. First, in those black clouds hanging heavily over the Spanish lines near Matamoros, during what was once described, sincerely, by more than a few, as the War for the Liberation of Cuba. And then, in more than one domestic shootout. Even the sovereign state of New Jersey has had its own equivalents of the fight at the OK Corral. But recently, very, very recently, he had found himself engaged with an enemy whose lines showed no black smoke at all, and he himself did not know what to do about it. Captain Clay's comments had not altogether taken the heart out of the chief. His heart was too big and too tumultuous for that. But that they had added to his burdens could not be denied, and he did not attempt to deny it even to himself. Vexation, indecision, frustration, fury, and finally rage caused that heart to beat more and more rapidly, more and more heavily as the day went on. And so, finally, although it was not the usual hour of the day, nor any of the usual days of the week, he got to his feet, closed and locked his door, changed into his second-best civilian clothes, unlocked his door, and said to his clerk in the gruff, abrupt tone in which he always said it, "You know where to find me." "Yes, Chief," the clerk said. He had gotten the job in the first place on the basis of a barely civil examination consisting of the one question, "Can you keep your mouth shut?" Some of the men who had 2 cars had the other car for the convenience of their wives. Not Ike Hoteling. "Isaac, don't you think it would be a good idea for me to learn to drive?" Etta had asked him once. His answer, in its entirety, had been, "Nah." He hadn't bothered to look up from the funny papers. Etta went back and basted the ham, and didn't even sigh. Isaac was a good provider, and one of his provisions was for his wife's stepmother, an evil-tempered besom whom none of her own sons would tolerate. Etta did not indeed love the old woman, but she perhaps hated her less and yet feared her more than did her stepbrothers and stepsisters. As long as Isaac paid the $50 a month for Ma's board and keep and pin money at the Dutch Reformed Church House for widows and spinsters, the chances of Ma's appearing to rant and rave stayed close to 0. There were worse things than not being allowed to drive a car. Etta basted the ham. Ike drove his other car away from Bogue Street, but not in the direction of his home address. He parked the Ford and went in the side door of a very nearby building. Myrtle was perhaps more surprised than she was pleased, but she did not show any displeasure. She never did show it. Hoteling had a certain way either of selecting compliant females or of educating them into compliance. "Newton," said Myrtle. Nobody else had ever even thought of calling him by his middle name. A good thing, too. "Oh, gee, what a great surprise. I wasn't expecting you, honey." They embraced. Women said of her, "Oh, she's just a little bit of a thing." They said it indulgently. She looked modest and drab enough on the street. She even scrubbed off her makeup before going down to the corner store. They didn't know, at the corner store, that her toenails were painted. Let alone did they know there that it was Newton who painted them. There were a few things that they didn't know there at the corner store, although to be sure, they knew quite a lot. "A cup of tea. Let me get you a cup of tea, Newton," she said, he having finally released her after silently rocking her back and forth for rather a long while. "And some cookies?" He pressed his hand flat against his forehead and slowly dragged it down to his chin, mashing, in the process, his Indian chief nose. He looked up from the flowered carpet. only if they're yours. Myrtle had a canny way with cookies, small and delicate and yet crisp and flavored in subtle ways unknown to the kitchen at his legal residence. Etta went in more for soggy crullers and pale, heavy pies. She was great at basting hams, though. "You can't baste a ham too much," she used to say. He drank, noisily, 2 cups of tea. Tea! What would they have said at the station if they knew that Solid Ike drank tea and ate a pile of her cookies with abstraction? The wallpaper was bright, and there were doilies on the chairs. After a long moment, Myrtle said very quietly, "Well, something is wrong. Want to tell me about it?" "Oh, Jesus Christ, mate. Somebody is making out that he's me, and he's collecting over $2,000 a week protection money for the brewery, and there's not a goddamn thing I can do about it." His voice grew thick and heavy towards the last words, and he put his huge hand to his huge face and burst into tears. $2,000 a week, he sobbed. "Oh, my God. $2,000 a week. And I can't get a penny of it." Her bag of tricks was perhaps small, but she had never known them entirely to fail. She leaned on his arm rather lightly. She waited till he had gotten control and didn't look up as he wiped his face and blew his nose. Then she said, lightly and softly, as she placed her tiny hand on the knot of his necktie, "Hey, I know what. Let's go play Oops-a-Daisy, It'll make you feel better, maybe." After barely a second, she said, "I know it will make me feel better." A small pursy smile began on Iron Ike's purple lips. "It would, huh?" She looked away shyly, nodded her head, and, after another moment, she began to slip down the knot of the necktie. At no time did she lose her head. Dr. Lloyd McKinney, the police surgeon, was a big man himself, and he brought with him 2 of the biggest men on the force. Fat Frank Feeney was probably the biggest, but he couldn't have kept a secret in a fireproof safe. "I couldn't lift him," said Myrtle, in the same desperate and breathy whisper in which she had called the chief's clerk. "I tried to get his clothes on, but I couldn't lift him." They stood there, gazing at the big, silent body, face down in the rumpled bed. After a while, she said, breaking the silence, "He said he was tired. He said he just wanted to take a nap." No one believed her for a second, but in their hearts they honored her for pretending. "Died in his sleep," Dr. McKinney said instantly. "Heart attack. Sudden, I suppose. Autopsy will show for sure, but no doubt in my mind. Well," he reflected. Nobody said a word, although one of the policemen, Matt Coe, slowly crossed himself, and after a second, so did the doctor. The doctor came to a decision, nodded. "We don't want any scandal now, do we?" "No," he said, just as they expected him to say. He turned to Myrtle. "Just wait outside for a few minutes, please," he said. She nodded. It was a doctor's voice, a doctor's orders. "Get his clothes on," he directed the men as he followed her out. In the nice, bright living room, McKinney looked at the clock, checked it with his pocket watch. "All right, then. So, here is what we better do," he said. "I very much doubt that anyone will ask," he said, "because we are going to hush this up. But absolutely, if anyone should ask, he left here over an hour ago. Got that?" It seemed as though he were going to say more, then he suddenly seemed to hear something, and, with an abrupt intake of breath, he turned and went rapidly back into the bedroom. Said, holding out his hand, "Yes, right, I'll take that, Harrison, Co." The looks exchanged then, Harrison to Co., Co. to Harrison, Harrison and Co. to McKinney, McKinney to Harrison and Co. were not friendly. But Harrison did release what he had, 5 double eagles, as a matter of fact, or in the common speech, 5 $20 gold pieces. "We just didn't want him to drop on the floor, Doc," Harrison said. "Yes, right. Thank you." Harrison felt impelled to say something else. He said it softly. "You know, Doc, the old saying, you gotta pick up the dead man somehow, and the best way is by the pockets. 50-50? McKinney's mustache twitched. His lip under it lifted, then it fell again. "I'll make sure that you are both with me when I hand it over to Mrs. Hoteling," he said. He had had a fleeting notion that there was someone nearer to hand who was in the long run going to be needing it more than Mrs. Hoteling, but it was certainly now impossible to do anything about it. "Get his breeches on right, damn it! And oh, make sure the buttons match the buttonholes." The living room had been bright with the last rays of the sun. By the time they were finished, though, it was dark. Nobody saw them get into the car, the second best car, the Ford, back in the side alley. But then there was another problem. Dr. McKinney's plans had depended on a church with open doors. This description would have fit the church of his choice, St. Peter ad Vincula. But the deceased had been a Protestant. The deceased had in fact left the faith of his fathers over a semantic difference with the Dutch Reformed minister Dr. H. Berryman Buren. That is, as Solid Ike had put it, "all of them big words, who in the hell can understand 'em?" And had taken himself off, at least provisionally, to the Free Baptists. But a quick investigation proved that this conventicle was, except for stated occasions, locked tighter than a chastity belt. However, the so-suddenly late chief had been known to visit now and then his equally late mother's church, St. James Episcopal, a foundation almost as old as the Dutch Reformed, and a perfect maze of gates and doors and seldom used corridors. Dr. McKinney, who prior to his marriage and conversion had been a communicant there, knew it like the back of his hand. And there, having paused twice en route just in case to check the security at Full Gospel and English Lutheran, nothing doing either one, there they deposited their charge. Neatly, in one of the best pews. "Dies at his prayers," said the sub-headline in the Gazette. Hoteling was succeeded in office by Captain Clay, who, owing to the rise in salary, was able to compound with his creditors and thus, after all, avoid bankruptcy. Myrtle was not so fortunate. Myrtle was not fortunate at all, even though Mrs. Snyder gave her back her old room at the Riverfront Hotel. Chapter 18. Down in the big basement of the industrial premises at numbers 5 through 55 Charlotte Street, in fact the only premises on Charlotte Street since Nightingale Ned Smith, the musical blacksmith, had closed 8 years before, Stan Sawyer was talking to his assistant, Hamilton Swift. "Put down the shovel for a minute now, Ham, and leave me explain a couple things to you," he said. Ham Swift, an immense young man in a filthy undershirt and blackened dungarees, gave his shovel one more scrape through the coal pile, then let it rest, stuck in at an angle. "Yeah, Mr. Sawyer?" Stan had once been every bit as tall and broad as Ham. He was, in fact, still as broad. He was, in fact, now broader, but the effort of holding his increasingly vast belly up had finally defeated him, and he now slouched when not on dress parade, so to speak. "Got enough coal for now? Enough steam in the boiler? See?" He gestured to one of a bank of dials and gauges. Ham nodded. Steam, boilers, gauges. These were impressive things, in fact. These were the higher mysteries. Ham's uncle Jefferson, Jeff Swift, had for 40 years been engineer on the old West Jersey and Indianville line, with 3 trains a day carrying coal from the old canal to the old foundry. Ham had shoveled coal at the canal barn since he was 12. Uncle Jeff had always promised that Ham would be fireman on number 4 one day, whenever Black Bob died or quit. But without any warning, without anyway any warning observed by the Swift family, who did not read newspapers, or for that matter anything else, the foundry had closed. The canal had not exactly closed, but for all commercial purposes it might as well have. One morning, number 4 had been waiting in the roundhouse for the signal as it did 6 mornings a week, with number 3 and 2 rusting on their old rusty rails. Number 1 had been turned into mini A-balls 60-odd years earlier. And the signal did not come. The West Jersey and Indianville line had, without the foundry's coal-carrying trade, simply ceased to exist. So had all jobs connected with it. There was not even a watchman anymore. Who would steal a locomotive engine and a train of 2 coal cars which did not even connect with any other railroad? Black Bob just vanished. But Uncle Jeff put on his Sunday clothes, filled all the pockets with coal, and walked off the Deer Creek Bridge. Stan Sawyer had come back for the funeral, had seen Ham, huge and mute, had said after the funeral, "Young fellow, you come back with me, and I am going to give you a job." Ham's mother, who would have been a widow had she ever actually been married, a formality not usual in those parts in that family, to Ham's father, said, "The Lord must have sent you, Mr. Sawyer. Ham ain't too bright." "Don't matter." "Couldn't keep him in school. Can't read." "Don't matter." Stan Sawyer reached his cup for a final cup of coffee. "Got a foreigner working for me now. I'll fire him." And so he had. The foreigner had said nothing. At least, he had said nothing in front of Stan Sawyer and Ham Swift. And if he had said something in his own home and his own language, why, who in the hell cared? Ham was introduced at the plant, where his size and musculature proved all that was necessary in addition to Stan Sawyer's introduction. Ham was also introduced at Mrs. Wilmer's rooming house, where he and Stan Sawyer innocently shared the same broad bed. They worked together at the boilers, at the furnace. At the furnace they broiled their own bacon and pork chops and ate their half loaves of bread at a time. As Ham was not good at counting change, Stan made the purchases. Once a week, Mrs. Wilmer filled out the money order Ham sent home. Once a week, the 2 men went together to the Riverfront Hotel, but Ham was the one of the 2 who went upstairs once a week. Stan only went upstairs once every 2 weeks. The other time he played cards and drank beer only. And once a week they went to the movie theater. Tom Mix. "I gotta go march in the parade, like I told you, Ham," Stan said, now in front of the furnace. "Yeah, Mr. Sawyer," Ham said, lifting up the front of his undershirt and wiping his face with it. He knew that Mr. Sawyer was a veteran, and that veterans had to go march in parades. It would be nice if he could go watch the Columbus Day Parade, as he had gone a couple of times to watch the 4th of July Parade back in Indianville. But they couldn't both go, because then there would be nobody to shovel the coal. Ham was very happy shoveling the coal. It was as good as shoveling the coal from the canal side. It was as good as shoveling the coal on number 4 engine would have been. True, Ham did not altogether understand what they were shoveling the coal here for, but there were a lot of things which he did not understand. There were a lot of big machines upstairs, probably that had something to do with it. "Now, remember what I told you about these gauges here?" "Yeah, Mr. Sawyer." "Pressure gets past 10. Turn this here little wheel here." "Yeah, Mr. Sawyer." Mr. Sawyer nodded, gestured that Ham could resume his shoveling. Mr. Sawyer had brought his good suit to work and hung it up on the toilet door. Now, having carefully spread newspapers on the floor, he changed into it, and into his good shoes. He then put on his veteran's hat. Then he looked in the tiny cracked and faded mirror. Then he waved his hand and walked up the stairs, stepping in time as though he had already heard the fife and drum. Ham shoveled coal. From time to time he looked at the gauge. It was like a clock, and it had numbers all the way around it. Ham had never learned to tell time either, but he did remember that there were numbers all around the clock. He wasn't sure, now that he thought of it, and he thought of it very, very briefly, that there was a number 100 on a clock. He scraped his shovel against the floor under some coal. He liked the shivery sound it made. So he did it some more. He laughed and threw more coal on the fire. For some reason, at that moment, the voice of Miss Livermore came into Ham's mind. Miss Livermore had taught the old school at 3 Points. She had tried to teach Ham. She had tried hard to teach Ham. Her voice seemed to be speaking to him right now. 1 with an O, Hamilton. 1 with 2 O's, Hamilton. 1 with 3 O's, Hamilton. Hamilton! Hamilton, oh my! Ham laughed. The flames danced. "I'm strong," he said to no one. "I'm pretty strong." Chapter 19. "What's up?" asked Jordan Steinmetz, the press's rewrite man, getting to his feet and looking across the street. Stell asked, "What?" "Looks like everybody from over at the Gazette is leaving." "What the dickens? Fire drill? No! No! They're coming over here!" And, sure enough, they were. All of them? Stell certainly did not know everybody at the Gazette, but it did look like all of them. She got up to watch as they all walked into the big room there on the second floor of the press building. Sure enough, in came Bill Bomberg, and came right over to her. "To what do we owe the honor of this visit?" she asked, trying to sound as if she weren't rather scared at this unprecedented occurrence. He looked as though he were a little bit scared himself. "You can search me," he said. "All I know is that we were all told to get on over here. Maybe war's been declared. Maybe Hoover has abdicated and Indian Charlie Curtis is president now." Stell said, "Huh," and then looked around to see if anyone had heard this almost laugh. If anybody had, nobody seemed to care. Very shortly, the big room was pretty full of people. Certainly, even if everybody from the Gazette was not here, everybody was from the press. And at that moment, up spoke H. Rule, the Gazette's publisher, who had never, so far as she knew, even entered the building before. "Make this brief," he said. "Have everybody's attention. Economics of the situation. Not room anymore for 2 daily papers in this town. Mr. Emery and I, same conclusion." There was not a sound. "I've sold him the Gazette," said Rule. "Bless you all." Oscar Emery cleared his throat. "We'll be using this building," he said. It's newer equipment. And as far jobs, it's a matter of seniority. You all know how long you've each worked here. Over 5 years. You've still got your job. Less than 5 years. Sorry, but that's that." Not a sound. Rule had the last word, Emery having turned away and started out. "Show must go on," he said. "Still working. Back to work. Press Gazette now." Stell found herself downstairs on the front steps with her hat and her coat on. Somebody said to her, "What are you going to do? Do you know?" It was Bill. Numbly, she shook her head. "I don't either," he said. She looked at him. Her heart felt swollen and sore. He looked about the same as she felt. Then a little smile came on and went from his face. "Whatever we're going to do," he said, "let's do it together." Still, she didn't say anything. She started down the steps. If he had taken her arm at that moment, she would have jerked it away. He didn't take her arm. He walked close to her. He walked very close to her, and when, at the bottom of the steps, she slowly turned to go down the street, he turned and went with her. And they didn't say anything to each other, but they kept on walking close to each other until they were touching each other as they walked. Chapter 20. Ham Swift shoveled on another load of coal. Then he took his rake and worked it through the flames. Then he applied himself to the damper and the grate, chuckling at the noise. Then he paused. There was, he felt, something he should do. What was it? A slight pressure in his bladder at once caused all other thoughts to fade. And, opening the snaps of his fly, he urinated into the space beneath the grate. The hissing of the steam also amused him. He could not for the moment think of anything to do next, so next he did nothing. After a while, he sat down on the sturdy wooden box placed there for the purpose and stared in happy vacancy in the glowing coals. As the good women of the NFTU gathered on the sidewalk in front of their hall preparatory to walking down to join the Columbus Day parade, Mary Mabel Moomaw took the chance to say a confidential something into the ear of little Birdie. "I'm so glad," she murmured, "that Attorney Spears didn't say anything about Dr. Brower and the, factory." "Oh, yes, Mary Mabel, so am I." "Because, besides the embarrassment, I was so afraid, that he would suggest that we all go and visit the place. And oh, Birdie, I just didn't feel that I could again. The smell, the awful smell." Birdie gave a grave nod. "Of beer," she said, lowering her voice. Mrs. Moomaw compressed her mouth. Then she loosened it for final comment on the subject. "Of beer," she agreed. One after one, the various units for the parade fell into place, some on the sidewalks, some in the street. Patriotic parades in Yokums tended to contain all the same element. However, in some official recognition of this being Columbus Day, the Grand Marshal was His Honor former Assistant Judge Louis P. Belcampo, who was assisted on this occasion with a list of all the units participating. There were, for example, all of the American Legion and VFW posts. There were all the high school bands and all the fife and drum corps. There was the bagpipe band, the Catholic War veterans, the Jewish War veterans, the United Spanish-American War veterans, Boy Scouts and Sea Scouts, the Knights of Columbus and, judiciously apart, the Knights Templar, a Masonic body, and ditto the Order of de Molay, the National Family Temperance Union, and so on and so on. Pride of place was given, of course, as always, to the Grand Army of the Republic, a veterans organization composed of the survivors of the U.S. Armed Forces in the Civil War, who were placed just after the NFTU, not because there was assumed to be any particular connection, but because it was hoped that any spectators who might tend to become restive during the passing by of the NFTU would respectfully cease to be so upon catching the sight of the GAR. The GAR units consisted of several sections, in fact. First of all, of course, would be the gallant veterans themselves, and after them the ladies of the GAR, and then the Loyal Legion, and then the Sons of Union Veterans. At the last previous parade for the 4th of July, there had been 5 Civil War survivors. Since then, however, Colonel Sergeant Lassing, 6th New Jersey Sharpshooters, had passed on to his reward, to be with his savior in the heavens. And Major Levi Fisher, Brooklyn Zouaves, had passed on to San Diego, to be with his granddaughter and her family. The newspapers had quoted him as having said that he would of course be sorry to leave the scenes of his childhood. His actual comment had been, "Jesus Christ, another one of them son of a bitch winters would kill me." And today, and at the very last minute, someone of the family of Corporal Ernest Anhalt, Fröhlingeisen Fencibles, had phoned up to say that Uncle Ernie just isn't up to it today. We all feel terrible, but he is in bed. "So who does that leave?" Grand Marshal, His Honor former Assistant Judge L.P. Belcampo, wondered out loud, consulting his list. Well, it left exactly 2. 2 members of the Grand Army of the Republic for which it stands. Two surviving veterans of the irrepressible conflict, and they both of them realized this at about the same time, and so they both gave each other official nods of recognition, in which was mingled some note of common triumph over time and chance. Private Don Carlos Daddy Wilkerson's uniform tunic was so eroded by years and by usage that one would scarcely have known what it represented. But his GAR campaign hat now, darkest blue, semi-broad-brimmed, golden cord braiding it about, everybody knew what that was.
"'Twon't rain now, will it?"
Old Daddy Wilkerson kept asking.
"'Twouldn't do to get me hat wet. No, 'twouldn't do to get me hat wet. Couldn't get another one, you know. Not any more. No, not any more."
Also on hand, and even more obviously on hand, was Commodore John Calvin Clutterbuck, in full fig, including sword and cocked hat with feathers.
"I trust we shall have good weather for the occasion,"
he said, taking a reading.
"If these plumes get wet, they're as good as ruined, and you have no idea how difficult it would be to replace them nowadays."
The eyes of the two old warriors met, finally. For a long moment they only looked at each other. Then each nodded and touched hat in informal salute. Nodded. Clutterbuck's nod said, you were a mere private foot soldier who never went to the academy and never felt the salt spray upon the picket line at sea, nor smelt the smoke of the blockade runners, but still you did serve on the right side in the war between the states, so I do acknowledge you. You were a mere middy boy, and you never had to fear the Parrott cannon guns, nor never had to stoop down and drink rainwater from hoof prints left by the rebel horse. But still, you did serve the Union in the Great Rebellion, so I do acknowledge you." Thus, the nods of these two old, very old men to each other. A message runner came and spoke to the Grand Marshal, who nodded and sent his own assistant with a message for both old men. "The mayor is sending the city limousine for the gallant veterans to ride in because of the heat." The gallant veterans swiftly scanned each other. Rank has its privileges. Commodore Clutterbuck spoke first.
"My comrade Wilkerson may ride if he chooses to. I, of course, shall walk."
Private Wilkerson gave his head a tiny jerk in which one might have read a tiny measure of scorn.
"My comrade Clutterbuck can ride if he gets tired," he said. "Course I'll walk."
And so that, of course, was that. The mayor had emerged from the private room of a conveniently located restaurant, where he had taken aboard a little something for his nerves, and was given the news. He sighed. "Giants of the earth," he said. "Well, Patsy, we might as well get the show on the road. Don't you think so?" "I think so," the Grand Marshal agreed. He gave a signal, a whistle sounded, a bugle blew, drums began to beat, children jumped up and down and clapped their hands. The first balloon of the day escaped, and the first little girl announced that she had to go to the bathroom. Real bad. The parade was on its way. The new publisher of the Press-Gazette was giving last-minute instructions to his oldest reporter. "Now, remember, Mr. Fogarty," he said, "no more stories about any beer pipes or beer hoses. That story is dead. And, he groped for the mot juste. "And buried?" suggested Peter Fogarty. The publisher all but leapt to catch the word. Yeah, and buried," he exclaimed. Fogarty suppressed a sigh, assured his employer that he understood. On the way down the stairs, though, he uttered aloud a sudden thought. "Say, I wonder where he got the money to buy the other paper," he exclaimed. A ghostly chuckle sounded. Willie, the ancient janitor, leaned on his push-broom and showed his tortoise gums. "Say, don't you know that, Petey?" "No," said Peter Fogarty. "But I suppose you do, Willie." He had forgotten that Willie was popularly supposed to know everything. But now he remembered, and he waited. "Why, sure," said Willie. "Sure. The senator loaned it to him." Oh ho, oh ho. Fogarty waited another moment. But Willie was again just an old man at work. His puckered lips pursed as though ready for a whistle, he slowly marshaled a tiny heap of dust, in which were several wooden matchsticks, the tag from a sack of Bull Durham, a piece of orange peel, part of a Hershey bar wrapper, and a soggy part of a soda bottle label which read, Tation Strawber. His long face, longer than ever with thought, Peter Fogarty walked on slowly down the stairs. He sighed. In a speculum, enigmatically, he said, and then, 7 children, a wife and 7 children. And he sighed once more. The mayor and the grand marshal had been the first to march, and they were the first to leave off marching. The usual reviewing stand had been set up in front of the city hall, and there, behind bunting, they took their places, silk hats in hands. Before them, feet, many, many feet, marched and stamped rhythmically upon the street. The patch of asphalt was also there in the street before the reviewing stand. Part of the roadway had sunk several inches. Perhaps the asphalt was only there as makeshift. Perhaps it was there as a marker or reminder. The Yokums streets were torn up for repairs with frequency, and as to those who argued the post hoc ergo propter hoc, which Peter Fogarty had once mentioned in connection with the fact that a leading local politician was also a leading paving contractor, why, probably they were just jealous. Be all that as it may have been, minute after minute and quarter hour after quarter hour, the marching feet went stamp, stamp, stamp. On the reviewing stand, His Honor the Mayor and His Honor the Grand Marshal moved their silk hats so as to cover their hearts whenas the flag went by. It went by often. Ham Swift wanted a drink of water, and, on his feet to the faucet, he passed the bank of dials and gauges. He slowed. He looked at them. He did not stop. On his way back, there they were again. Again he slowed, again he looked at them, and this time he did stop. He looked at them for rather a long time, and once again a voice sounded in his memory. "Yeah, Mr. Sawyer," he said. There, the needle. It was there, fluttering away. Sure enough, it was by a number. A 1 with an O? A 1 with 2 O's? For a long moment he stood there, hesitating. Then he said, "Yeah, Mr. Sawyer." He reached over to the wheel, and he turned it. Mr. Sawyer had told him to. And indeed, Mr. Sawyer had. Mr. Sawyer had not, however, told him which way to turn it. Not that Ham realized this omission. The matter did not occur to him. He gave the wheel a turn. It resisted him. So he gave it another turn, and it came off in his hand. For another long moment he looked at it. Mr. Sawyer hadn't said anything about this. Maybe that was what the wheel was supposed to do. Ham set it down very carefully. Then he went over and, taking up the iron hook, opened the furnace door. A delightful flicker of blue flames met his large and largely vacant blue eyes. All was in order. He sat down on the box. The incident of the wheel did not worry him. It did not worry him. He had already forgotten all about it. Daddy Wilkerson and Commodore Clutterbuck marched side by side. The whole parade. At the end of the parade was the reviewing stand, upon which both would stand, whilst one of them, the Civil War veterans took turns year by year, would read General Logan's Order No. 1, commanding the decoration of the graves of the Union dead. No. That was for Decoration Day. This was Columbus Day. It was, for October, hot. But neither one would indicate the least fatigue. Finally, there was a pause, a stop. Each one recollected what still lay ahead. To wit, speeches. Lots and lots and lots of speeches. Too much sugar for a penny, Don Carlos Wilkerson thought to himself. Not even a hoofprint to drink from. He swung his head slightly around. His eyes met those of his comrade Clutterbuck. They faced each other.
"Hot day,"
said John Calvin Clutterbuck, Commodore, USN, retired.
Yes, sir. Tis,
said all that was left locally of the army of the Shenandoah. The two old, very old men licked their withered lips and looked around in vain. There was not a sutler's tent in sight. Then, both together, they said,
very hot day.
There had once upon a time been 3 hoses. Each one had, so to speak, worked an 8-hour shift. Then there were 2, and each one had worked, as it were, a 12-hour shift. Then there was 1, and it had been working around the clock. True, it was a thick hose. True, it was reinforced with copper wire. Still. And then the pressure had started building up, and still the hose held out. If the pressure had been turned off at that point, all might still have been well, but the pressure had not been turned off. And now, in fact, with the wheel broken, there was no way to turn it off. And so, finally, the National Family Temperance Union filed into place in front of the reviewing stands on the steps of City Hall. Hard behind them came the sons of Union veterans of the Civil War. There was one loud stamp of feet. The sons had been well trained, and the mended patch of asphalt sank, dissolved, vanished. A spume, a gusher, suddenly appeared. It rose over the heads of the incomprehending multitude. It flew up in the air, and then, whilst the flow still continued, the head of flow condensed from flow into liquid. It drenched Mrs. Mary Mabel Moomaw, from the stuffed bird on her hat to the buckles on her high-buttoned shoes. One slightly tipsy oldster did indeed cry, "There she blows!" Some there were in the crowd who at first thought that a water main must have burst, but not Mrs. Moomaw. The full horror of it all burst upon her in one single second. She knew. "Help!" she cried, trying vainly to escape. "Help! Oh, help!" The press of the crowd held her fast. "It's beer!" she screamed as she struggled. "Beer! Help! Beer!" Private Don Carlos Wilkerson's eyes flew to the eyes of his comrade Commodore John Calvin Clutterbuck. It had been a long march. It was a very hot day. With one simultaneous and decisive gesture, the 2 old warriors swept off their hats. With high-kneed steps, they flew to the very spot of the miraculous flow. They were not the very first to be there, but they were the first to be there with anything to drink from. The rest of the throng was right behind them. The federal inspectors at the Near Beer Brewery paced listlessly. This had once been a beaut of a job. 50 cents a case rake off on each case of undealcoholized beer they had illicitly let pass. Then, and after all, this was the land of opportunity, was it not? They had struck for $1 a case and had not gotten it. Very well, then, so only Near Beer had gone out. But had this, after all, put any money in their pockets? It had not. The lassitude of the day was suddenly broken by the sound of running feet. The man on pony patrol went out on the gallop, came back at once. Following him was a well-known figure. $1 a case, okay, it gasped. One of the beer checkers had started to nod, wide-eyed. The other one pushed him aside. $2 a case, he declared. Demand's danger is supplies opportunity. The newcomer tore off his hat, threw it down, stamped on it. "God damn it! Okay, he capitulated. "They'll just have to pay more for their beer in New York then," he said. "Oh, the goddamn hoses is boosted," he yelled. "Start bottling." And then someone else appeared. It was the chief inspector of the beer check squad, Hubert Harrison. He wagged both hands in front of his face. Everything stopped once more. "They're watching the Holland Tunnel for beer," he said sorrowfully. "The Department of Justice is, and the ferries," he added. There was a long silence then, and then someone said slowly, "They're gonna die of thirst in New York." This appalling prospect spread before them. All faces fell, all heads were scratched, and then an automobile came rolling into the yard. Almost before it stopped, the chubby figure of Sonny Boy Boykin came tumbling out. "Did you start bundling already? No? Good. Where's old man Morse and his helper, huh? The Coopers? Let me see the Coopers. The barrel makers, the big guy, just had a wonderful idea." There was steam in the box. There was always steam in the box. The chief engineer of the vessel saw to that. It had been his first order and was, regardless of other concerns, always his chief concern. He gave the gleaming brass another loving wipe. Then he looked up. What a commotion on the wharf! What a rattling and echoing of rickety timbers! But Preacher Babcock never rushed. It never paid to rush. With deliberate pace, he went on deck. The captain was already there. The new cabin boy peered wide-eyed. Coming down the packet-boat wharf was a truck laden with barrels, all stenciled whale oil. Behind it was another truck. Behind it was another truck. Behind... The first truck stopped. The two men came tumbling out of the cab and went running towards the gangplank. Horatio Seymour Clack took his place. "Hold on there! Hold on!" he shouted. "I'm captain here! What's going on?" The first man had attempted to stop, but the momentum had been too much for him, and he tripped and he fell. He did not wait now until he regained his feet, but leaning forward on the backs of his knuckles, he shouted, "Charter, freight, cargo, New York City!" H. Seymour Clack, captain, master, and owner of the packet boat Sadie Howell, licensed according to Act of Congress, drew himself erect. Slowly he surveyed his vessel fore and aft. Then he said calmly and triumphantly to his chief engineer, "See what I told you? On their knees. On their hands and knees."